Boo!
So let's go ahead and get into part 2 here. I do have another video. Like I said, this is Dr. Bass's name is. This is him in the years later, obviously recently, but he was sought by a local news station to do a segment because apparently he was going to make an appearance locally for the Children's Museum or something like that. So this kind of just shows you who wrote what we're about to talk about and who put in all this work. So let me pull it up.
Right after the explosion, you went down there in person, though.
I got a call about 11:30 that morning from the disaster team in Tennessee. Wanted to know if I would come down to an explosion.
And you've seen a lot in your career.
Oh, yes, yes.
I mean, this was pretty tragic, though, even compared to a lot of the scenes
Yes.
you've been called to.
Yes.
Well, let's put it this way. Dr. Bass had to put the top half of someone and match it up to the other part.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How about
you
that?
had
Is
to-
that a nice way of saying it?
Wow.
What we did was we rented 2 refrigerated trailers. We put the torsos in one trailer and the body parts on another. So you had torsos for females and males because they were both sexes. And literally, it just blew them apart. And when we went out and brought all this stuff back, we put, for example, let's say legs. We'd have 2 piles of legs, rights and lefts. However, in our culture, we say that women should shave their legs. And so, this is a good forensic thing. So you look at the leg, it's shaved, it went into the women's pile. So we had not only 2 a right and a left, but we had two rights and 2 lefts divided by.
You're getting a glimpse at the science, and this is one
okay.
interesting man, and they're a great dynamic duo
If
together.
that doesn't get you to buy your ticket right now, I'm fascinated. Again, children.
I love how it's all set up around a children's thing. Yeah. It seems really simple, but this is this guy's specialty. He's known for being this, world renowned as one of the best at it. I think as I get into the details of what report he wrote for the Bureau, the simplicity that he was talking on that interview does not quite cover the great length and work it takes to do this. Again, what I'm about to read to you is from the Benton, Tennessee firework disaster that happened in 1983. And I will warn you, some of these details and things I'm about to say are gruesome. So if you are, if that bothers you, you probably don't want to listen to this because this is going to go into detail of the remains of the individuals and stuff like that. So this is from his report. Body number 1, a woman who had been blown over the house. She hit the carport roof, punched through the corrugated fiberglass, then skidded across the concrete, her path marked by a wide streak of grease. Shreds of fabric clung to her shoulders and arms. The rest of her body was nude, her clothing ripped away by force of the blast, and her buttocks turned silver gray, the color of gunpowder. She lay face down, upper body on the edge of the concrete, her lower body on a piece of roof she had shattered. Her left leg, the foot had been blown off and all the flesh stripped from the bones of the lower leg. Her right leg was largely intact, and the shoe had been torn from the foot, but it stayed on long enough to protect the sole of her foot. Her toes were undamaged, though her ankle was shredded. The worst damage was at the other end of the body, though. The base of the skull was there, but the rest of her head was simply gone. Body number 2 had crashed through the metal roof of the house itself, splintered the 2-by-10-inch rafters, and come to rest in the attic. Another large white female, she had too been stripped by the blast. A 2-inch drywall screw lay beside her. Piece of foam board insulation was beneath her, while particles of the white foam and splinters of the rafters were sprinkled atop her bloody torso. She was also lying on her stomach, her right arm tucked underneath and body across, emerging near the left shoulder. Her left shoulder did not have an arm attached to it. The arm had been shredded off about 2 inches below. Large smear of blood and tissue marked the spot where the woman's head had impacted. The top of her head was missing, and her brain lay 4 feet away. Body number 3, another nude female, was the only one that was not hurled from the barn by the blast. She was laying face up, her arms flung back over her head, as if she had been sitting near the origin of the blast. As if, when it happened, it topped her backwards. Her flesh was burned to a crisp grayish black, brittle and crumbly. Her lower legs were both missing from mid-shin down. Her forearms and hands were gone. Body number 4, out in the pasture between the barn and the woods, a line of flattened grass and gouge in the earth marked the place where a body had hit, then skipped another 15 feet before coming to rest. This one was young, slim white female. Unlike the older woman, she was not nude. She was wearing blue jeans and denim. The right leg of the jeans showed little damage. The left pants leg had been shredded. The contusion had split open the left thigh. Her shirt had been peeled over her head. Her arms were still caught in the sleeve. Her bra was undamaged. Her legs, back, and shoulders were melted to pieces of pale, almost white skin. Body number 5. At the edge of the woods, they found the guy who might have been doing the mixing. He was laying face down, or at least his upper body was. But his torso had been twisted 180 spine snapping degrees, so his pelvis was facing up. Put his right leg where his left leg should have been. His left leg was nowhere near his body. His abdomen had been ripped away. Some of the entrails were exposed and the rest were missing. So was at the top a few inches of his left arm. Surprisingly, his face was relatively undamaged. Body number 10. One of the 3 male bodies was nude except for leather boots, still tightly laced around his feet and ankles. When we took off the boots, we saw that his feet were purple with bruises. One of his hands lay detached by a nearby grass. His head was nowhere to be found. Body number 11 was perhaps the most bizarre of all. The explosion had hurled him the furthest, nearly 100 yards, skipping across a pasture into the woods. As he entered the tree line, he snapped a branch on a pine. The jagged end of the branch pierced his abdomen and snagged a loop of his small intestine. As the body continued into the woods, the intestines were unspoiled like fishing line. Once he reached the end of the line, so to speak, he was yanked to a stop. They found his torso at the end of 20 feet of intestine, still stretched tight like rope. By the time the sun set on the scene of destruction, they had found 11 bodies or torsos, along with dozens of arms, legs, hands, and feet. People were not the only casualties. In the grass of the pasture lay a rabbit. It had been killed by the blast shockwave, but its fur was completely unharmed. Closer to the barn was a dead chicken. Its tail feathers were gone, showing it had been facing away from the blast. Another chicken had survived despite the loss of one leg, but it remained rooted in one spot, trembling for hours. The next morning, they did find additional pieces, a few ears and teeth and skull fragments and debris, a mandible and a foot-long section of a spine, half a dozen of the vertebrae in the woods, but after a while it became clear that they had only recovered everything that was reasonably recoverable. Although many of the bodies were battered, it was still easy to distinguish the 3 male torsos from the 8 females. Next came the harder problem of matching the daunting stack of severed arms and legs to the proper torsos. Dr. Bass started with legs. To simplify the task, they divided the legs into lefts and rights, then further subdivided it into shaved and unshaved. That way, if the female torso were missing a left leg, they could go to a pile of shaved legs and look for the one whose break or length of girth matched the torso. Within a few hours, they had paired all of the loose parts with torsos, even without DNA testing, which wasn't yet available back then. They hadn't found everything. A few fingers and toes and ears were gone, and substantial portions of faces and skulls were decimated by the blast, but they found most of almost everyone, which was remarkable considering the force of the explosion. Tima identified the dead as, and this is the name of the dead. I don't want to butcher their names, but I'm going to try my best here. Faye Trentham, 38. Daughter, Tana Trentham, 19. Doris Burns Longmire, 29. David Webb, 22. Brother of Dan Lee Webb. Sybil Duggan, 24. William Lee Burns, 38. Beatrice Webb, 51. Mother of Dan Webb. Dixie Freeman, 21. David Parks, 38. And his wife Judy, 36. And Albert Kenneth Johnson, 53, who was the uncle of Dan Webb. Authorities were unable to determine the exact cause of the explosion, but concluded that it had probably occurred as a result of explosives being mixed. The charred remains of an electrical drill with a paint stirring attachment were found, and the prevailing theory of the cause was that a spark from the drill's motor reached the mixture. Investigators concluded that other possible causes could have been sparking from an electrical wire, light fixture, or other appliances found on site, and the scraping of boots on the floor. A cigarette lighter and 3 packs of cigarettes were also found on site, which investigators determined could have caused the ignition of a highly explosive vapors and were byproducts of manufactured process. ATF agents estimated that approximately 300 pounds of explosives were detonated in the blast. Authority found 172 boxes of unexploded fireworks worth about $20,000, $55,000 today, and estimated to weigh more than 2,500 pounds, and 6 55-gallon steel drums full of chemical explosions in a nearby trailer. Federal firearm agents also found a firework case to 10 inches in length and 4 inches in diameter, which due to its large size prompted Polk County deputies to speculate that some of the explosives were being purchased by people with criminal intent, such as terrorists. The undetonated explosives were found buried in the ground on the farm and later detonated in an open pit nearby. Cooper Hill having been used as evidence in Webb's trial, the farm also found to be guarded by an elaborate security system, consisted of surveillance cameras, electrical fences, alarms, guard dogs, and warning signs. Dan Lee Webb, who had been found in Lansing, Illinois, delivering 86,400 M80s during the event, surrendered at the Polk County Sheriff Jail 2 days later. He was charged with 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter and illegally manufacturing and possessing explosives, and jailed with a $300,000 bond, which is equivalent to about $800 to $16,000 these days. Linda Sue Webb was held on a $50,000 bond, equivalent to $136,000, bail as a material witness in order to ensure her appearance in court. Webb's brother Larry was also held as a material witness with a $50,000 bond, but was released shortly after. Details of the trial. Debbie Trentham, 18, testified when she worked at the fireworks assembly line factory and linked Dan Lee Webb, 30, to operation. Miss Trentham said he earned $5 an hour and was paid in cash. Miss Trentham said she started working at the factory in April. She was not asked where she was the day of the factory exploded. After they filed the firecracker tubes with the chemical stuff, I put the liquid gas in one of the tubes and put it in the fuses, she said. Bob Holland, chief of the ATF explosion response team, said flash powder was packed into M80s and M100s manufactured at the plant. Holland said, banned by federal law, the explosives were known as quarter pounders because they packed the power of a quarter pounder stick of dynamite. Holland said friends of the victims told investigators that workers generally mixed the flash powder by hands like a salad. Dan pleaded guilty to 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Webb's sentence to be served with a 10-year federal term. He was given on April 19th for manufacturing the explosives without a license. He was also fined $10,000 in federal case. After the trial, Webb was taken to Orangeburg, South Carolina for questioning about a similar explosion which killed 25 people there in 1983. According to Agent McCarty, assistance from Webb had enabled federal investigators to broaden their probe of illegal fireworks manufactured in 20 different states. Bramblett was arrested 2 days later in nearby Chatsworth, Georgia, after cases of M80 fireworks were found in 2 locations in Murray County. He was extradited to Polk County Jail. A federal court jury convicted him and another man on May 3, 1984, in 1 count of manufacturing illegal fireworks, 1 of conspiracy, and 1 of storing the homemade explosives. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison in July for his role in a similar incident that occurred on May 24th in Roseville, South Carolina, in which an explosion had illegal fireworks operation killed 2 and injured 5. He had $60,000 worth of illegal fireworks in his home at the time of his capture. On June 1986, Bramblett John Franklin Miller, this was the guy who was the manufacturer, the primary supplier of the materials, and 2 others were charged and found guilty of a jury of conspiracy in the operations. The 16 others pled guilty. A few weeks later, on July 7th, a U.S. District Court judge handed Bramblett a 10-year sentence for 1 count of participating in the activities that occurred. Wow, that was a lot.
That was rough. Wow. The descriptions so similar to like war explosions and stuff like that. And the descriptions of what it did, like they do to soldiers' bodies. And these people were just working a crappy job. And they had no idea how dangerous it was. And for that to happen, that's rough. And then, like, there was another one that killed 25 people
That he may be connected to, and then others in the operation. It's not like there's 2 or 3 other ones that they connected him to. So a lot of deaths out of this.
That guy should be in. How long is he in jail for?
Dan Webb was 10 years, and I think the other individual were 10 years as well.
They should have been in jail for life for this.
That's why I'm sharing the story, because it's scary. It could impact a lot of different people. You didn't know what you're doing. You're just trying to make money. And was that sentence enough? You're saying no.
Not at all. He's been out of jail for 30 years now, almost.
Yeah.
And he's probably dead now, actually. But still, like, this guy is, tangentially connected to 30 or 40 people dead.
This guy and his operation, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be life. Just like, straight up. You get that many.
Obviously, this was a deep operation. I'm trying to remember the name of the individual who actually had experience in manufacturing it that kind of orchestrated it all. I think he got 10 years as well.
He got 10 years too, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he was obviously very critical in this operation because he actually taught them how to do it. If you want to say taught them how to do it, I don't know how accurate that is.
So weird. Like, this should be like a movie. Or like
I had never heard of
series.
this. This blew my mind. I was like, man, I'm really stretching saying this is a scary story, but this is like a firework accident that is beyond anything I've ever heard of. I heard of like firework factories exploding, but I guess this one was intriguing to me because all the different variables and factors that went into the operation and how it kind of webbed out into all these other things.
That was nuts. And you still, like, you just don't think about illegal fireworks trade and manufacture as like a thing, really, man.
I wonder if it's still that big of a thing, doing that.
Probably. I don't know. You don't really hear about people, buying M80s too often anymore, but there's probably still people who do it.
Somebody asked, how did they decide they were going to do this on fireworks? I think they had met with that, like connected with that dude, I think is what it was. They needed money. He needed money. He was facing extreme financial hardship running that bait.
And then that guy knew that he had area to put together a factory at. And, geez.
Sounds like that one guy kind of got him involved because he could see a profit from it. That's what it kind of sounds like to me.
Yeah. Good Lord. That's just monstrous.
What do you think in the chat and you, Luke, about the job that Dr. Bass does and did?
That's a tough job. But, I mean, there's always got to be people that know how to do that kind of stuff. And
it seems silly, but put yourself in that moment. How difficult would that be?
It's probably the most, way you could distance yourself from it and not be bogged down with the horror is to kind of be like, okay, this is the best way we can to
mathematical.
Yeah, just start pairing these up. And so you're not getting if you got this job you got to do, you just have to do it sometimes. And it's gross. And then, you have to be a certain type of person. I know I couldn't do it.
Imagine that. Calling you in, Luke. Hey, this disaster happened. I need you to cover the bodies. Did this all in a day, it sounded like, basically.
Yeah, and to pull it off without DNA matching and get highly probable connected bodies. That one that you described that went flying and his intestines got hooked on the tree.
He is 20 feet long, yeah.
Yeah, that is the strangest thing I have ever heard of in my life. That's something out of a cheesy movie.
You got to think this explosion was so strong. How fast did that explosion?
Over 100 yards.
I don't know what to say, eject him, how far to throw him, how fast was he moving? Very gruesome one, the most gruesome thing we've ever probably talked about, but scary, man, that people are just working and this happens. It's terrible.
That's messed up.
Luke says, shit.
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here? Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?